So it's 2020 and here I am still alphabetizing my CD collection, which, given that we're in the era of being able to stream almost anything instantly, might seem like I've gone back to the Stone Age, but there's a good reason for it. I'll cut straight to the chase. This year, I'm challenging myself to learn 100 albums by ear. 2 artists at a time, 2 albums a week. Why? Because musicians that I really respect, including Michael League, Jacob Collier and Bob Reynolds, have all been saying things that have made me rethink my listening habits and made me realise that I need to put my ears on a diet. A new ears resolution for 2020, if you will. We're living in the age of information, where you can access pretty much anything within the space of a couple of minutes. Now, don't get me wrong, streaming services are a wonderful thing for musicians. They're a great resource for making playlists of tunes that I need to learn for gigs, instantly streaming songs that I've forgotten to learn for gigs in the car park before the gig or during the break, and generally just being able to dig up obscure albums that are otherwise really hard to find. So they can be a great resource. The problem with having access to pretty much everything all the time is being able to moderate that information and know what to do with it so you can process it in a meaningful way without getting overwhelmed. I often find that I'll open up Spotify and I don't know what to listen to because there's too much choice. Now, I recently watched an interview with Michael League from Snarky Puppy, and he said something that really, really resonated with me. And I'm going to paraphrase him because I can't remember the quote verbatim, but this is the gist of it. Michael League said that we're kind of incapable of creating a sound that isn't directly related to a sound that we've heard before. He then went on to say something along the lines of, when we play our record collection. And when we write music, we write our record collection. Now that struck me as being fairly revelatory, but who still has a record collection? The problem with having the sort of musical equivalent of an all-you-can-eat buffet in your pocket at all times is that it devalues music in every sense of the word. I went to a Bob Reynolds saxophone masterclass last year because driving 2 hours each way to a 5-hour saxophone masterclass is my idea of a nice day off. Anyway, Bob Reynolds was saying that when he was a teenager, he used to save up loads of money, go to New York and go to the big Tower Records, and he could only afford a handful of albums, and that meant that he would listen to each one to death before moving on to the next one. And that emphasis on quality over quantity gave him a much, much deeper understanding of the musicians that really inspired him, like Joshua Redman and Sonny Rollins. And if you contrast that with the sort of listening habits that we are leaning towards now with Spotify and Apple Music, things like that, even YouTube, it's tempting for us to develop a very broad but very shallow understanding of music. So over the past few months, I've had to take quite a lot of time off from playing and practicing for various life reasons. I've moved house, I've been trying to convert what is essentially a glorified garden shed into a home studio, and I've also become a parent, so the bass and music have really taken a bit of a back seat. But even though I haven't been practicing, I've been doing tons and tons of listening, and in the middle of all the home improvement stuff, I forced myself to put this thing on in the background. Now, I have to tread carefully here because if there's one thing that bass players love, it's Victor Wooten. I'm not quite sure I share that sentiment. Anyway, one thing that Victor said in this really didn't sit well with me, not because of what he said, but how it might be interpreted or misinterpreted. So there's a section in Groove Workshop where they talk about technique and the importance of technique, and Victor opens up that section by saying, technique is really important because it helps you get your musical ideas out. Now, the problem with that statement is that most bass players, when they hear that, will hear this. When what's actually being said, and the most important thing about that statement, is this. Now, it's the misinterpretation of statements like this that is part of the reason why most bass players are obsessed with technique. 9 times out of 10, if you ask someone what they're working on, the response would be, oh, I'm really trying to get my technique together. Why? What's the point of having loads of technique if you have nothing interesting to say with it on the instrument? Ideas are the thing. Ideas are why you love listening to players like Marcus Miller or Adrian Farreau or George Benson or Michael Brecker. It might sound like technique, you might think it's technique, but really ideas, musical ideas and concepts are at the heart of their playing. That's what attracts you to them. Where do ideas come from? They come from your inner ear, your oral imagination. There's no way that you're going to be able to play anything interesting unless you first hear it in your head. And if all you do is practice scales and string crossing and double thumbing etudes, then you're not really going to have anything interesting to say with your instrument. How does this tie in with listening to 100 albums in a year? The answer is ear training. And I'm not talking about the sort of academic ear training that is associated with interval recognition and relative pitch development. Not that that's not vitally important. In fact, it's probably the most important thing that you could work on. I'm talking about carefully looking at your listening habits in order to create your own personal style and develop a unique voice on your instrument. Sounds pretty hippish and pretty cliched, but there's a great book on what I'd call stylistic ear training by a guy called Ran Blake. It's called Primacy of the Ear. Now, reading books about listening to music is kind of along the same lines as taking swimming lessons over the phone, but this is the only book that I've found that talks about how to listen to things in order to develop a personal style on the instrument. The author suggests taking two contrasting artists that you really like the sound of and listening to all of their recorded output in chronological order in order to give you a sense of how their style, both in their playing and in their writing, develops over the arc of their career. You also get historical context for everything that they did during their career, which is something that's often missing when you adopt the sort of ADHD, streaming whatever happens to be on your mind approach to listening. I'm starting out the year with two of my favourite improvising musicians, Bill Evans and Pat Metheny. One album from each artist per week from the start of their careers in chronological order. Now, I've only been doing it for about 3 weeks, and already I'm really starting to feel the benefit, not least because it's forcing me to focus on just one or two musical things at a time. The other benefit is that I'm getting loads of wider context for both the music itself and the players that are on those records, which is something that I was completely ignorant of before, so it feels good. If you're up for taking the 100 album challenge this year, then you don't need to resort to arcane media like this. You can just use your preferred streaming service. All you have to do is find two artists that you really love the sound of. It doesn't have to be jazzers, it can be anything at all, as long as you're really into it. Once you've chosen your two artists, just get on Wikipedia or allmusic.com. Those sites are both great for finding out the exact discography for each artist, so you can map out week by week the albums that you're going to be listening to. All you have to do then is make the time to listen to those two albums every day. If you are up for taking the challenge, if you feel like giving it a try, then I'm really curious to know who you've chosen. Really, really interested to know what other people are listening to. So if you're going to take the challenge, if you're up for it, then leave a comment below. Let me know who you've chosen.